Hello, Ken Barron here, and we wish you a Merry Christmas and hope you have a great 2023. But however, we have things to think about here, and that basically this time around, my topic is 2023, the NABWMT against hatred. So we're asking ourselves, what will happen in 2023 to the fight against homophobia, and what the NABWMT and all of us can do to react to this. The levels of political violence are on the rise across the country, and the majority comes from the right, where violent rhetoric that spurs actual violence is routine, and it seems to be escalating. At anti-L.G.B.T.Q events, sign-waving protesters are increasingly joined by members of the street-fighting Proud Boys and other right-wing paramilitary groups. Their presence increases the risk of such encounters turning violent. Talk on right-wing message boards has turned much darker. Far-right activists have been waging a nationwide campaign of harassment against LGBTQ people and events in which they participate. For example, there are protests against drag queen story events, which are similar to other public readings for children, except that readers dress in a highly stylized and gender-fluid manner and often read books that focus on acceptance and tolerance. Meanwhile, protesters vandalized the home of a gay New York City councilor with homophobic graffiti and attacked one of his neighbors in protest of drag queen story hours held at libraries. The protests use the language of the right-wing media, where demonizing gay and transgender people is profitable and popular. Tucker Carlson, a Fox News host who rails against transgender people and the medical facilities that serve them, has the highest-rated primetime cable news program in the country. Twitter personalities with millions of followers flag drag events and spread anti-trans rhetoric that can result in in-person demonstrations or threats. Facebook pages of activist groups can mobilize demonstrators with ease. Some Republican lawmakers are using the power of the state in service of the same cause. Several states are trying to restrict or ban public drag shows altogether, amid a record number of anti-LGBTQ bills introduced this year. Republican politicians also use a barrage of lies about trans people in their campaign ads during the midterm elections, funded to the tune of at least $50 million, according to a report released in October from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. The NABWMT and its allies should endorse a concerted national effort against political violence. This would require cracking down on paramilitary groups, tracking extremists in law enforcement, and urging the Republican Party to push fringe ideas to the fringes. Every citizen has a part to play, and the most important thing we all can do is to demand that in every community, we treat our neighbors and their civil liberties and human rights with respect. We must call out and reject the dehumanizing language that has become so pervasive in online discussions and in real life. And that's about particular groups of people. Calling LGBTQ people pedophiles is an old tactic, and it makes it easier to ignore or excuse any violence that may come from their way. Calling transgender people groomers is increasingly common and usually goes unchallenged. Marco Rubio, a Republican senator, released an ad in which he said, quote, "The radical left will destroy America if we don't stop them. They indoctrinate children and try to turn boys into girls," end quote. A conservative activist group recently ran ads in several states, including one that said, quote, "Transgenderism is killing kids." Florida lawmakers debated the Don't Say Gay bill, and Ron DeSantis, the governor, one of his staffers posted on Twitter, quote, "If you're against the anti-grooming bill, you are probably a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of a 4 to 8-year-old child. Silence is complicity." But the silence from a great majority of Republicans on the demonization of and lies about trans people has indeed increased the likelihood of random violent acts against the people who are the subject of abusive language and threats. Extremists posted online the addresses of a physician who works with transgender children at the hospital. The doctor had to flee the home. Many hospitals feel they have no choice but to protect their staff, even if it means making the care they provide less visible. Extremism has no boundaries. So these threats can come from anywhere. Acts of political violence against the entire LGBTQ community have more than tripled since 2021. Anti-LGBTQ events have more than doubled in that same period, and the nature of the intimidation is changing. Protesters dressed as civilians have been replaced by men in body armor and fatigues. Signs have been replaced by semi-automatic rifles. Political violence comes in many forms, and the country now faces a choice. Either violence becomes endemic to our democracy, or Americans decide not to tolerate it. We know that's difficult in a country where too many people consider political violence to be sometimes acceptable. Let us not forget there are fundamental constitutional protection of what Americans can do in public life. They can enjoy the rights to assemble and state their views, however repugnant. Politicians, of course, have the right to speak up to voters, even if that means riling them up and exploiting their prejudice for political or for financial gain. Those are the tensions of living in a free and open society. If Americans are going to put a lid on political violences, they need more than law enforcement and legislation to do it. The heartening thing about the problem of political violence is that those Americans who reject it are far outnumbered by those who don't. We have the power to vote and donate, to lobby elected leaders, and to set high standards for our police departments. We have the power to change the channel or close the tab to ignore violent rhetoric. We have the power to support the most vulnerable members of their communities from immediate threats in person, if necessary. That's what a healthy and vibrant democracy looks like. We have the power to join the NABWMT and others to look for extremism, protect people at the margins, rally for our rights and freedoms to live and love. Despite all this, please have a Merry Christmas and look forward to a much better, with your help and activists, a much better 2023. This is Ken Barron again with the NABWMT. Please like us, comment, or subscribe. And we look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you once again for listening.